for millions of Americans. Bret Baier is the calm, authoritative voice they trust every night on Fox News. Steady, polished, unshakable. But behind the camera lights and the perfectly delivered headlines is a story far more heartbreaking than anything he has ever reported on air. A story of fear, survival, and a father fighting to keep his family whole while the world expects him to stay strong. From a devastating diagnosis the moment his first son entered the world, to multiple heart surgeries, sleepless nights in hospital corridors, a near-fatal car crash, and the kind of personal loss that shatters even the strongest men. Bret's life has been marked by battles no news anchor could ever prepare for, and to understand the weight he carries today, we must go back to the moment everything changed, the day his newborn son was placed in his arms with a failing heart. A father's first battle, the newborn with a broken heart. When Bret Baier first walked into the hospital delivery room in 2007, he had no idea his life was about to fracture into before and after. He was an established journalist, respected, stable, confident, but nothing. Not war zones, not political scandals, not breaking news, could prepare him for what he saw when he looked at his newborn son, Paul. At first, everything seemed normal. The baby cried, the nurses smiled, and Bret felt that warm, impossible love new fathers always talk about. But minutes later, the mood shifted. A nurse noticed Paul's skin turning an unnatural shade of blue. She frowned, called for help, and suddenly, the room filled with alarms and strangers. Paul's heart was failing, not in a metaphorical way, not in a long-term danger kind of way. It was failing right now. Doctors rushed him into emergency testing. Bret and his wife, Amy, followed helplessly, both trembling with a fear they didn't yet have words for. Hours later, a cardiologist finally spoke the words that shattered them. Paul had 5 severe congenital heart defects, a rare combination so dangerous that the doctors compared it to trying to run a house with the wiring built backward. Blood flowed the wrong direction. Oxygen couldn't circulate. His tiny heart, no bigger than a walnut, was fighting for every second of life. He needed open-heart surgery immediately. The chances of survival were unclear. For the first time in his life, the professional communicator, the man who never stuttered on camera, found himself speechless. Bret collapsed into a chair in the hallway. He later said he had never prayed so hard, so desperately, or so honestly. Amy held his hand so tightly, her nails left marks in his skin. Paul survived the first surgery, but that wasn't the end. Far from it. Over the next several years, Paul underwent 5 open-heart surgeries and 10 catheter procedures. Bret and Amy lived in a cycle of hope and dread. Weeks of normal life interrupted by sudden crises that sent them straight back to the operating room. Their marriage grew strained under the emotional weight. Bret missed work. Amy cried silently at night, and their home became a battlefield where every heartbeat was a victory. The only thing that kept them going was a sentence they whispered every day. One day closer to getting Paul home. But even as Paul fought for his life, Bret's own world would soon be shaken in ways he never expected. The crash, the loss, and the scandal. The anchor who nearly broke. By 2019, Paul was a teenager. He played golf, laughed with friends, and lived as close to normal as a child with 5 heart surgeries could. Bret finally felt like life had granted him a ceasefire. But just when the darkness seemed to lift, another crisis came racing toward him, literally. While on a family trip in Montana, the Baiers were driving on an icy road when their car suddenly lost traction. The vehicle skidded sideways, spun out of control, and slammed into an oncoming pickup truck before rolling into a frozen ditch. The world flipped. Glass shattered. Snow swallowed the windows. In those horrifying seconds, Bret thought his entire family was gone, but by some impossible miracle, they survived. A stranger pulled them out of the vehicle. Bret later said that the moment he grabbed his son's hands and felt them squeeze back was the closest he had ever come to feeling divine intervention. Yet life wasn't done testing him. Only months later, Bret's father, the man who shaped his work ethic, his discipline, his unwavering moral compass, was diagnosed with cancer. Bret watched him fade, powerless to stop it. He held his hand when he took his final breath. It broke him in a way even Paul's surgeries hadn't. Losing a parent changes you, especially when that parent built the framework of your life. Still, the world expected Bret to return to TV, smiling, steady, strong. He tried. He pushed through his grief, believing the worst was behind him. He was wrong. In 2021, the Dominion voting system's lawsuit against Fox News revealed internal messages that shook the network and tarnished Bret's reputation. Screenshots leaked, showing him caught in the political crossfire, lobbying producers, worrying about viewer backlash, appearing less neutral than the public believed. Overnight, he went from respected anchor to headline controversy, the man who survived a child's near death, a family car crash, and the loss of his father was now surviving a different kind of battle: public doubt. For Bret, this wasn't just a scandal, it was a crisis of identity. He built his career on being fair, balanced, trusted. And now strangers questioned everything. This storm, however, would lead him to rediscover the one thing that had always pulled him through: the strength of his family, especially the boy who had already fought harder than most adults ever would. Healing, purpose, and the miracle of survival. In 2024, when Paul was 16, doctors made a terrifying discovery: a dangerous aortic aneurysm, a ballooning of his artery so severe that, if left undetected, it could have killed him without warning. Bret froze when he heard the news. Another surgery, another risk, another plunge back into fear. But this time, Paul didn't look scared. He looked strong, mature, ready. "This is just another surgery, Dad," he said. The operation was long, complicated, and terrifying but successful. For the first time in 16 years, Paul walked out of a hospital with a repaired heart and a future that felt wide open. Today, he plays golf, travels, jokes with friends, and dreams like any other teenager. Bret calls him a miracle in motion. And it is precisely because of this miracle that Bret Baier and his wife have poured more than $1 million into heart research and the Children's Hospital that saved Paul's life. They created the Baier Family Fund, helping other children born with the same deadly defects. Bret speaks at fundraisers. Amy serves on the hospital board. Paul meets other heart patients and tells them they aren't alone. The suffering that nearly broke their family has now become their purpose, and through it all, Bret Baier has changed. He no longer cares about ratings, public image, or the politics swirling around him. He cares about survival, his sons, his families, and the families who still sit in waiting rooms praying for miracles. In every interview now, Bret repeats the same words. Every single day is a blessing. He says it because he lived the alternative. The days where a heartbeat wasn't guaranteed. The nights where a phone call from the hospital could end everything. The moments where the world went silent, and faith was the only thing left. In the end, Bret Baier's story is not defined by the newsroom, the ratings, or even the controversies that tried to stain his reputation. It is defined by something much deeper, something raw, human, and far more powerful than any headline he has ever delivered. It is the story of a man who spent years reporting the hardships of others, only to discover that life had its own breaking news moments waiting for him. But instead of collapsing under the weight, Bret learned to endure, to rebuild, and to find grace in the darkest corners of his journey. His son's fragile heart taught him humility. The car crash taught him gratitude. The loss of his father taught him perspective. And the public scrutiny taught him resilience. Through every trial, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer in a cold hospital hallway, Bret emerged not as a perfect man, but as a present one, a father who refused to give up, a husband who held his family together when fear tried to tear them apart, and a man who learned that vulnerability is not weakness, it is strength earned through suffering. Today, Paul Baier stands tall, living proof that miracles still happen in a world that often forgets they exist, and Bret, watching his son play baseball, laugh with friends, and live a life doctors once said was impossible, knows that nothing, absolutely nothing, matters more than this. Because in the end, the most heartbreaking news was never what happened on television. It was what happened in his own home. And the greatest victory was not surviving the scandals, but surviving the storms that nearly stole his family. And through it all, Bret Baier finally discovered the truth he had been chasing his entire life. Every day you get to love the people you care about is a day worth fighting for.